Barrett sat frozen at his kitchen table, every nerve screaming at him to move, but fear held him in place like iron shackles. His trembling fingers hovered over the keyboard, his eyes locked on the twisted reflection in Maisie's lifeless, glossy eyes. In the distorted glint, it lurked, a shifting, unnatural form, tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly out of sight. His chest heaved, breath shallow and uneven, as icy dread pooled in his stomach. The buck's severed head loomed grotesquely on the table, its antlers casting jagged, menacing shadows across the walls. He couldn't fathom how it had gotten there, or how Maisie, his beloved dog, lay dissected with surgical precision right in front of him. His grip on reality was slipping. The comforting boundaries of logic and reason had been shattered. Barrett! The voice slithered from the dark corners of the room, low and guttural, dragging his name out like a predator, savoring its prey. He whipped his head toward the sound, his eyes darting around the kitchen. Empty. Nothing there. But in the periphery he saw it again, a fleeting shadow, a ripple in the fabric of the air. His heart pounded violently as he forced himself to look straight ahead, terrified of what he might see if he turned too quickly. The whispers started again, soft at first, like wind through brittle leaves, then rising in intensity until they felt like nails scraping against his skull. "You stole from me. You cannot escape." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through his very bones. Barrett clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, grounding himself in the only reality he could still trust: pain. He reached for the shotgun lying on the floor by his chair, its cold steel barrel a meager comfort against the overwhelming terror. "I don't know what you want," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Take it! Take the deer! Just leave me alone!" The kitchen lights flickered violently, plunging the room into strobe-like chaos. In each brief moment of illumination, Barrett caught glimpses of it. Elongated limbs, impossibly jointed, shifting and bending in ways that defied nature. Its face, or what should have been a face, was an empty void, a black hole that seemed to draw in the light around it. Barrett stumbled backward, the chair clattering to the floor. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of unintelligible threats and laughter. The air thickened, oppressive and suffocating, as if the entity was swallowing the space around him. With shaking hands, he raised the shotgun and aimed blindly into the void. "Stay back," he screamed, the words more for himself than for whatever was tormenting him. He pulled the trigger, the deafening blast echoing through the house. Silence. For a moment, he thought it was over. He dared to hope that he'd banished it, whatever it was, but then, from the corner of the room, a low, rumbling laugh began to build, reverberating through the walls like a seismic tremor. The shadows in the room began to shift and merge, coalescing into a single, towering form. Its hollow face turned toward him, and though it had no eyes, he felt its gaze pierce straight through his soul. "You cannot give back what you have taken," it hissed, each word dripping with malice. "Your debt is paid in blood." Barrett's vision blurred, his legs giving out beneath him as the room seemed to warp and twist. The last thing he saw before darkness consumed him was the creature's hand, a gnarled, claw-like appendage reaching out for him. When Barrett woke, the sun was streaming through the blinds. The kitchen was spotless, the deer head, the blood. Maisie's mutilated body, gone. Even the buck meat in the cooler on the porch had vanished, as though none of it had ever happened. Barrett staggered to his feet, every muscle in his body aching. He stumbled to the bedroom where Clara was still sound asleep, her soft snores the only sound in the house. Relief washed over him like a tide, but it was short-lived. On the table, where the buck's head had sat the night before, was a single scrap of paper. In jagged, unnatural handwriting, it read, "You can't outrun the shadows, Barrett. They're always just out of sight." The room seemed to darken around him, the corners of his vision blurring. He didn't need to turn around to know it was still there, waiting, watching. And it always would be. Dreams can haunt you, but nightmares can shatter reality, leaving a scar that lingers long after you wake. This was no ordinary nightmare. It was something darker, something visceral, something I'll never forget. For context, when I was a child, I lived in Miami in a rough neighborhood. I was too young to understand how dangerous it really was, but my parents did. When I was 5, we packed up and left. Fast forward to this nightmare. My parents decided we'd visit our old house in that Miami neighborhood. The first thing we noticed was the gate, a massive metal structure encircling the entire area. It was odd, ominous. There wasn't an entrance, just a small, suffocating hallway that led inside. For some reason, a kid from my current school was with us, standing by the gate as we approached. When we entered, the place was unrecognizable, run down, broken, the decay almost palpable. Despite the unease, we wandered the streets until we found my childhood home. The house was eerily intact. My family decided to explore it, each of us splitting off into different rooms. My brother went to his old room, my parents to theirs, leaving me, my friend, and my little sister in the living room. At first, we were just standing around, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. Then my sister, being her usual 5-year-old self, said something silly to my friend. But instead of laughing it off, his face twisted with anger. He glared at her with a hatred that didn't make sense and told me coldly, "I'm going to hit her." Before I could react, he stormed off to another room, returning with a golf club in his hands. I tried calling for my parents, screaming for help, but no one came. I pleaded with him to stop, to calm down, but he didn't listen. When he swung the club, I stepped in front of my sister, taking the first hit, then the second, then the third. The pain was blinding, but I couldn't let him hurt her. That's when everything went from bad to horrifying. He grabbed my sister and sank his teeth into her neck. Blood poured everywhere as I tackled him, desperately trying to free her from his grip. I punched him over and over, but it was like hitting a brick wall. In a frenzy, I grabbed a stick and jabbed it into his ribs, but nothing worked. Finally, the cops arrived and dragged him away. As they hauled him out of the house, he turned to look at me. His eyes, I'll never forget the hatred burning in them. It wasn't human. It was something darker, something evil. We stayed in that house for years after the incident. One day, as I was watching the news on a television that seemed to just appear in the house, a chilling report came on. My friend, now in prison, had completely snapped. He refused to leave his cell, carved a smile into his own face, and eventually disappeared, without a trace. The anchor's final words hit me like a punch to the gut. He's missing, and authorities have no leads. I knew deep down that he was coming for me. The fear consumed me. Desperate to escape, I grabbed a knife and prepared to end it all. But just as I was about to do it, I felt something behind me. I turned. There he was, bleached white skin, dressed in all black, with that gruesome, bloodied smile carved into his face. His eyes burned with that same unforgettable hatred. He leaned in close and screamed, "Suicide!" Before I could move, he slit my throat. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my hands clutching at my neck. But the terror didn't end there. The next day I saw that same friend at school. He smiled at me like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't just a dream. The look in his eyes, empty, yet full of something sinister, was the same as in my nightmare. And every time I think about it, I wonder, was it really just a nightmare? Or was it something more? Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in your nightmares.